Hello and welcome. I'm Ian, and tonight I'm joined by the other esteemed members of Group 7, Logan, Mark, and Eric. This case, Philadelphia versus New Jersey, is ultimately about landfills. So I won't waste any more of your time. Let's dial it back. It was the year 1973. New Jersey passed a law known as the Waste Control Act, which essentially prohibited both liquid and solid waste from being transported across state lines into the state of New Jersey. My colleagues will later explain, however, the main contention from New Jersey was this was a safety and public health concern. Philadelphia, however, said, no, you're doing this for economic reasons. Now, Philadelphia sought an injunction against the law, alleging it was unconstitutional. A New Jersey trial court ruled in their favor, saying, yes, this law is unconstitutional. However, the trial court ruling was reversed by the New Jersey Supreme Court, who said that New Jersey had every right in favor of health and public safety concerns to do what they did with the Waste Control Act. The case ultimately ended up with the Supreme Court of the United States, who heard arguments on March 27th of 1978 and issued a ruling merely months later on June 23rd. A couple of key facts I'd like you to know about the case. One, the Commerce Clause. Absent federal regulation, this clause permits states to legislate commerce, so long as laws do not discriminate against or improperly burden interstate commerce. All objects merit Commerce Clause protection. No object is excluded from the outset, the very beginning. If a law is deemed protectionist in favor of a particular state, it is invalid per se. Also, when looking at this ruling, the Supreme Court looked at public health and safety concerns versus the commerce benefits. We will also touch on how quarantine laws impacted the decision and the ruling in this case. So without further ado, I'll turn the time over to Logan, who will dive deeper into the arguments behind this landmark case.
Thanks, Ian. There's two arguments to this story, as there is with every story. Originally, New Jersey argued that waste wasn't really considered to be commerce, and therefore it wasn't regulated under the Commerce Clause. They later abandoned this and went to the quarantine law. When the quarantine law is coupled with the Commerce Clause, it allows states to help regulate interstate commerce when it affects the health and safety of those within the state. New Jersey tried to argue this, saying that waste brought into the state was affecting the health and safety of those within the state because of the decomposing state and other noxious and dangerous gases and materials that were produced from the waste within the landfills. They coupled this with the overburdening of their current landfills and how they may not be able to effectively handle all of the waste that was being brought into the state. On the flip side, Philadelphia argued that this was not a law enacted to protect the people of the state, that was more of a protectionism measure, that was discriminatory based on the origin of the waste. That since they were still accepting waste from within the state of New Jersey, that this law wasn't meant to help those within the state for the health and safety, that it was essentially protectionism, that they wanted to push the burden off to other states, that they didn't want to accept waste, not because the safety of the people, but because they wanted to protect their state. They didn't want to deal with it. They wanted to push the burden off onto others. They also argued that private landfills had commercial interest in accepting waste from other states. So therefore, New Jersey was, while enacting Law 363, affecting interstate commerce more than a slight burden, as they claimed. Previously, the Supreme Court has ruled that interstate commerce under the quarantine law can be regulated by the states if dangerous materials may be brought into the state, as long as it doesn't affect a large part of economic trade or interstate commerce. So the two arguments are essentially, is New Jersey enacting Law 363 for the protection of the safety and health of the people, or is it economic barrier protection? Are they enacting this law to protect their interest within the state? That is the question the Supreme Court had to decide on. I will pass it off to my colleague, Mark.
Thanks, Logan. Next, we're going to discuss the decision. Prior to the Supreme Court of the United States' final ruling on June 23, 1978, the case was heard by both the New Jersey Trial Court and the Supreme Court of New Jersey. The New Jersey Trial Court ruled that Chapter 363 was unconstitutional. On appeal, the Supreme Court of New Jersey upheld Chapter 363, citing that the rule advanced health and environmental objectives. The final ruling from the Supreme Court ruled 7-2 that Chapter 363 was unconstitutional. Justice Stewart wrote the majority opinion. He was joined by Justices Brennan, White, Marshall, Blackmun, Powell, and Stevens. Justice Rehnquist wrote the dissenting opinion. He was joined by Chief Justice Berger. Here is what Justice Stewart wrote. New Jersey cannot ban out-of-state waste, but accept domestic waste on those grounds as neither is dangerous to the public until they are put in the ground, at which time you cannot distinguish between the two sources. Stewart goes on to say, when a problem is common to all, states cannot erect statutes to isolate themselves from it, pushing the burdens elsewhere for other states to handle. The decision determined that you cannot discriminate based on origin. Therefore, this ruling didn't meet the quarantine laws, which they had argued, and then in turn violates the Commerce Clause. Next, I'll turn the time over to Eric to discuss the impact this had on New Jersey.
Thank you for that, Mark. I'm now going to walk through some of the impact that Philadelphia v. New Jersey had in the years after the case. First and foremost, the case helped further define the bounds of the Commerce Clause. The court clarified the difference between legitimate quarantine laws, which had previously been upheld, and economic protectionist measures, which had previously been found unconstitutional. In essence, the pretense of stopping commerce for public health concerns was not found to be legitimate. Nevertheless, these health concerns were a significant issue in the late 1970s, and so New Jersey sought to protect itself more. The state enacted waste disposal regulations that required locally generated waste to be processed at local facilities. But these measures also violated the Commerce Clause because the regulations deprived out-of-state competitors access to local markets. Then, a couple decades later, in 1994, there was a waste-related case in Oregon, Oregon Waste Systems v. Department of Environmental Quality of the State of Oregon. In that case, the court further narrowed states' waste disposal options by finding that a state cannot impose surcharge on in-state disposal of out-of-state waste. And in that case, they cited the Philadelphia v. New Jersey case from the 1970s. In many ways, this case is an indirect affirmation of the Supremacy Clause, whereas the federal government and the laws thereof are supreme and take precedent over state law. At the end of the day, this case reminds us of an old saying from history. In Germany, the national anthem used to have a first line that was Deutschland, Deutschland über alles, Germany above all. And as we think about the pitting of public health and safety in a state and the state's ability to protect its citizens versus the need to have commerce and trade amongst the states, we see that the Commerce Clause, uber alles.